Hey everyone, what's up? It's Ellie here. Last week I had the godly experience of being invited to the Bethesda ANZ headquarters in Sydney to play a limited snippet of Arkane Austin's upcoming title, Redfall. I got to play 90 minutes of the game at 30% into the main story at level 7 in single player. I tried my best to scribble down notes and take in as much as I could to give you my honest impressions and to answer your questions as thoroughly as possible. Then, when I was given the okay, I asked for your questions on Twitter, my YouTube community, and Reddit. One particular trend that I noticed that differed from when I did the Q&A about Deathloop was that so many submitted multiple questions at a time. Despite how many reveals, trailers, and pockets of backstory we have gotten so far, this is still Arkane Austin's and Arkane in general's first co-op game. Deathloop was a great introduction to an online aspect, but this is the first time that they have given us a game that we will be able to sit down and play with our friends non-competitively and actually be able to share an Arkane experience. And that is a massive thing. So players are absolutely scrambling to know as much as possible about Redfall, and I hope my impressions and answers to your questions can help you decide whether or not you'll be sinking your teeth into the game on launch. Before we get into the video, I just wanted to give a big thank you to the amazing Bethesda ANZ team for making this video possible. With Deathloop, they teamed up with Sony and sent me a PS5 that I had to send back later on to make sure that I could actually play Deathloop early, back when in-person preview events were still not as possible with everything that was going on in that time. However, last week I was actually invited to the Bethesda ANZ's office to sit down with a handful of other creators and play the game. And I just need to say another big thank you to the team for always reaching out to me and supporting what I do. It means absolutely everything to me. I had a world of fun and you guys were awesome. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. The first question comes from Echoes84 on Reddit. From the trailers and the gameplay, I still don't understand what kind of game Redfall is. I know it's an Arkane co-op that we can choose to play single player, but I don't get the full picture of the game. This is a broad question, but I want to try to answer it as succinctly as possible because I definitely have noticed that this type of question is a common trend. In 2021, Redfall was announced at the E3 Xbox and Bethesda showcase by Arkane Studios. It was developed by Arkane Studios in Austin, Texas. The title is set in the fictional town of Redfall, Massachusetts in the United States. After a failed scientific experiment, a legion of hostile vampires invaded and isolated the town from the outside world and began to block out the sun. Trapped between these tall, impenetrable walls of water that had been pulled from the town, players must choose between 4 unique survivors: cryptozoologist and inventor Devinda Crowsley, a telekinetic student Layla Ellison, combat engineer Remi De La Rosa, and supernatural former US military special forces sniper veteran Jacob Boyer, who have each independently found themselves trapped inside Redfall. You can play either single player or cooperatively with friends to slay the vampires, extinguish the cultists, restore and expand safe zones in town, and learn more about what caused it all to bring yourselves closer to the vampire gods, bring them down, and take back Redfall. Hopefully that and what's more to come in this video will help clear it all up for you and give you a better idea of what's to come. Ninja02099 asks how I would describe the tone and feel of Redfall. Redfall has this ominous and spooky tone. It's not a horror game, but it's quite thrilling. Travelling around town under the cover of darkness, it naturally makes you want to stealth around and take things in slowly. But you can play the complete opposite way, fast-paced, more action-inclined, with more explosions and chaos. Being an open world, you have this opportunity to do things at your own pace, in your own way. But there are also lots of different kinds of locations around the map. Playing with friends could take all the scare out of it, or you could find yourself getting jump scared alongside your friends. Pandora asks whether Redfall touches on horror or has any scary encounters. Redfall's ambience plays with slow piano notes, creepy floor creaks, and dim to zero lighting in smaller spaces. There are little things that are added to give you those jump scare moments, but it is by no means an Arkane's take on Amnesia. The feeling of exploring Redfall feels similar to exploring Talos 1 and Prey in some ways. I think Arkane did a great job of making me feel quite intimidated when it came to particular enemies, in particular the Rook's big loud lightning storm or the Shroud's disorienting cover. This question comes from Man of Vault and asks, what character did I play as and what was my favourite thing about them? It was a hard choice, but with an abundance of Laylas and Jacobs in the room, I chose to play as Remi de la Rosa with the intention of swapping to Devinda later in the session. Although I didn't really realise I would be so sucked in that 90 minutes, and it really just felt like 10 minutes, so I only got to play as Remi. No one actually played as Devinda, interestingly. What I really enjoyed about Remi was just how helpful she was. She's definitely going to be that support carry in the game, with her ultimate ability being Mobilize, which is an AoE healing circle. She can hold on to extra health packs, ammo and supplies, and Bribon's sirens distractions really do help. I can see her being really strong in a group setting, but I also enjoyed playing her in my single player experience. Her healing really helped me in precarious situations, and Bribon can be upgraded to also provide AoE damage that assists. The thing I was personally disappointed in was that Bribon does not help in combat outside of the Siren ability, so there was no sentry turret mode or shooting from Bribon in general. Here is another hero-based question from Lord Wonderbar, about the hero I chose and who I think would enjoy that character the most. So, as I said earlier, I went with Remi, and she is most definitely going to be a hero those who usually default to support will enjoy. She can instantly revive players by dropping her ultimate, so if a couple of members of the team are down, it won't take as long to get back on top of things in a particularly hairy fight. But the best thing about Remi is that she can hold her own, as I mentioned earlier. Give her a sniper, a shotgun, a UV ray, and she can fight just like the rest of them. She's not a support that is limited to supporting, and I think that's a really great thing. Luca Inca asks, is the playstyle hard locked by the choice of character or skill tree? There are abilities that each of the heroes have that will make certain playstyles just that little bit easier to truly obtain. For example, a stealthy playthrough is definitely going to be a lot easier if you're Jacob and you're using his invisibility, as well as spotting and marking enemies using his Raven, especially if you want to achieve stealth as a group. But you can also use those abilities and be completely chaotic. And you don't have to use those abilities to be stealthy. That's the thing about Arkane games, is the ability to do almost anything you really want to do in a multitude of ways. Kind of like playing a stealth playthrough, Flesh and Steel in Dishonored. Sure, some of the powers make it a lot easier, but you can still achieve an entire stealth playthrough without them. So each hero can pick up and play every different type of weapon that isn't attached to an ability, like Devinda's Arclight, and you can essentially play a multitude of ways on every hero. So apart from abilities, what makes each of these playable heroes a distinct experience in Redfall? Well, Redfall is a story-driven experience, and each of those playable heroes are experiencing the events in Redfall in their own perspectives. And each of those heroes have their own history and experiences to create their own unique contextual lens. The heroes all have voice lines that pop up consistently throughout gameplay. They range from small comments when you come across a particular item, or a comment on a newfound piece of information after an event, even in ways that others in Redfall speak to you. One hero might not have anything to say about a space, but another may, and one hero might understand something quicker than another and make a comment that helps piece things together just that little bit more. Outside of the voice lines, there are cinematic scenes that are going to appear differently, not based on the actions taken like in Dishonored, but more like based on the context of their personal experiences. And that in itself may encourage multiple playthroughs as well. Ninja Zero wants to know if there is banter between the heroes and if there are any references to vampire culture in Redfall. I didn't personally play co-op as the session was single player only, but we do know that heroes do banter with each other and have different standing relationships that can affect that banter. This was confirmed at the event also in discussion. In regards to references to vampire culture, I personally have found a couple, and there are also a few great other references, but I won't be covering what exactly until the game is out. Judy wants to know, can you pet the crow? Now, when I answer this question, just make sure you're sitting down. In Redfall, there are a couple of pet-like characters, either in the forms of abilities or sidekicks. However, sadly, I could not see a way in which the crow could be pet. I am sorry, I'm not sure why, but Jacob does interact with the crow in the form of voice lines. However, Jacob is actually quite a bit rough with his ethereal buddy, calling him Wormbrain and being a little mean, so I'm wondering if this is just Jacob's personality or if there's a lore reason to it. With Remi and Bribon, Remi is quite affectionate to Bribon. her little robot pal. However, Bribon also cannot be pet. They can, however, be interacted with. If you interact with Bribon, they'll jump up and down for joy, but they sadly also couldn't be pet. I think I spent about 5 minutes trying to figure out if I could or couldn't, and I was quite devastated. Pandora asks, in comparison to other open world games, how large is the map, and are all buildings enterable? Redfall has been described as having a larger map than any of the other Arkane games. Without borders between each of the 5 major neighbourhoods, it will definitely feel as so. I wasn't able to traverse the entirety of the map within the whole session, but I also wasn't trying to do so. Because of this, I can't give you an accurate comparison to an existing game. It's definitely not a Fallout game comparable. What I did notice was that as I moved through the map, after doing a little bit of enemy clearing, I could really quickly reach points by just sprinting there, and that in itself made the map feel a little bit smaller for me. For example, we started off at the fire station safe house, and from there we picked up a side quest at the movie theatre around here. But our overarching objective was down here at Dr. Addison's mansion. It pretty much took me the 90 minutes to move through this particular section of the map, close to a vampire nest, kill most of the enemies, and complete my objective. But I was very well aware of my time limit, and was definitely moving through things faster than I usually would like to. Fast travel points can also be unlocked through safe houses and landmarks, which help you get to places faster, and are particularly helpful if you have to respawn or if you want to get to your friends quickly. Due to there being no player tether, all 4 players can be in all corners of the map at the same time and use these fast travel points to meet up. So basically the map does feel large, but with high mobility and the ability to fast travel, it does make it seem a little bit smaller than it actually is. In response to Hierophant's question, Redfall isn't an incredibly busy or condensed space, so there are a lot of parks, woods, riverbeds, and lake beds that spread apart a lot of the main buildings and houses. Things are a lot more spread out than on the streets of Karnaca, for example. There are areas that are way more condensed than others, and it will be sprinkled with small shops, offices, and homes. To answer the last question, no, not all of these buildings are explorable. However, there are a lot of buildings you can't enter that can still practically help you move through the space, or still hold a small bit of environmental storytelling on the exterior. Similar to the Dishonored games and Deathloop, they both had unenterable buildings. A second question from Hierophant also asks about verticality in the game, and whether we have apartments and multi-storied buildings. We most certainly do. In fact, most of the buildings I could enter were multi-storied. There is a decent amount of parkour you can do, as well as the addition of emergency stairs outside of using abilities to help you scale larger buildings and scout from the rooftops. Enemies also utilize this vertical space, particularly vampires, who you can see either hovering high in the sky, on the rooftops, or on top of monuments and power poles. This begins to tie in with Comrade Mate's question, who is concerned that Redfall's level design has taken a step back. They would like to know if the level design is on par with previous Arkane games in terms of explorable spaces and verticality. I think it really is a blend between Dishonored 2 and Deathloop. Both games featured inaccessible rooms, but had some really interesting places to investigate that were made up for every door that wasn't openable. The idea seems to be quality, not quantity, and you can see that in their approach. I'll definitely come back to this in my review and dive deeper with some hours clocked into the game. They also ask about how well integrated powers are with the level design, and whether they are as useful as Blink, Possession, and Shadow Walk in stealthy exploring. So the movement abilities would be Layla's Elevator, Jacob's Invisibility, and Devinder's Translocator. Firstly, Layla's Elevator could definitely be useful for exploration. However, it's not a stealthy ability from what I've seen, and probably has more use in combat. Jacob's invisibility is massively OP. It would be the game's Shadow Walk, except you're totally invisible and nothing seems to disturb that other than the time limit, as you can attack without breaking it. So it would be a massive ability for stealth players, and it's actually something I don't enjoy about the game. It just seems too easy, and I think that's a reason why Shadow Walk became what it is. They wanted a level of invisibility or low vision, but something that wasn't just completely OP. Devinder's Translocator is beautifully demonstrated in the B-roll. You can throw it quite far and it works quite smoothly like Blink. It's also super useful if you're a self-identified heavy Blink user in previous Arkane games. A question from astronomer number 787 asks if there are puzzles to solve similar to Dishonored 2 with the safe riddle. Honestly, I am hoping so. There was only one puzzle I came across which required locating 3 dolls and bringing them back to their dollhouse. My theory was that the dolls would spawn in different locations with different prompts each time. Though when I asked someone else who had played, their prompts and locations were the same as mine, which was a little disappointing. When you consider the nature of the mission, the story-based past events would project in these spots, so I can understand why that decision was made, but I'm hoping there are a lot more little puzzles like that around the map that maybe do have some differentiation for each player. This question from Lordy D is one that I'm actually unsure of. I was constantly attempting to interact with the items on the benches, drawers, etc., and didn't actually find anything I could pick up and throw. I'm not saying it's absolutely impossible because I didn't spend enough time trying to confidently say yes or no, but I do remember feeling a little disappointed in the number of times I couldn't interact with things I wanted to, since bottle throwing can just add so much chaotic fun to a playthrough. I will say, definitely try to still interact with everything when you play because there are some things you don't think you can interact with that you can, and they're quite entertaining. Shamir asks if the open world feels alive, lived in, and dense. It really depends on what parts of Redfall you're in. The world most certainly does not seem as unpopulated as Dishonored, but it isn't as populated and lively as Deathloop. Most enterable places either have an enemy inside, outside, or are within sight of a vantage point of an enemy faction, so you never really feel alone. And there are safe houses you can claim that seem to be empty, but I'm unsure if over time they actually become populated once you claim them. I wish I played enough to completely answer this question from Lordy D. How are side missions? Are most of them simple and similar, or are they more unique? I only got to experience one side mission. When I awoke inside the fire station safe house, my character was in the basement. It looked quite bare. The first thing I did was basically walk up close to everything in the room to see what could be interacted with. Then I saw a note on an old popcorn machine, which I picked up and gained the Repair the Popcorn Machine side quest. I was to make my way down to the movie theatre, which was on the way to my main objective. Then I needed to collect the parts needed to bring the popcorn machine back at the base back to life. It wasn't the craziest thing or the most interesting mission, but there definitely would be something satisfying about bringing the popcorn machine back, slowly building up these base spaces and feeling like you're restoring some sort of normal back into Redfall. Reclaiming safe houses also become side missions, and you can also receive radio messages to assist survivor groups. I got one of those as well. This question from Olivia focuses on the variety of enemies. From what I've noticed, there is a pretty decent enemy variation. When I left the fire station, the very first thing that I noticed was this red mist with this fleshy egg or cocoon-like thing in the center of the road. These pop up quite commonly around Redfall. We do see them briefly in one of the trailers even. If you walk into this red mist, you begin to take damage, but in order to remove this mist, which is often blocking a particular pathway, you'll need to run into the center and destroy the fleshy mound, which you realize actually has something or someone in it. It's potentially the process of a cultist being turned into a blood bag enemy, in some sort of form of metamorphosis. The only way to destroy it is to use a UV beam to petrify it, and then you can follow it up with a melee attack. This egg thing is usually accompanied by another vampire hanging around, and will follow up with an attack after it's destroyed, or during if you take too long. There are some general vampires / minions that you'll see with no particular abilities, but all of these vampires do seem to have the ability to teleport to you once you've been spotted, from quite far away actually. And the funny thing is that I'm not actually sure if this was the difficulty I was on or the AI, but we were told the AI wasn't completely finished yet, so it may seem a little bit silly. But if you're engaging in combat with a vampire within a building particularly, there is a chance that they will try to warp over to you but end up going through the floor or the wall instead. When this happens, you can just crouch, stay quiet, and they seem to forget that you were there, giving you a chance to start again. So it was a little funny to kind of just continue on with my day. But I'm unsure if this is going to be a permanent thing that will just continue to happen or whether it's simply just something that's due to be fixed. And usually if there's a vampire hanging about, there are cultists around too. I'd say the ratio seems to be about 3 cultists to a vampire. So it's also a good idea to scout an area and maybe even try to pick off the vampires with some good stake launcher shots, particularly if you're playing solo and you're trying to be stealthy. Just makes it a lot easier. I only came across 2 hostile human groups, the Hollow Man group cultists who worship the vampires. One in particular we have now seen identified as the Hollow Man. They have standard issue weapons but do have grenades that when thrown release toxic red mist, the same that covered the area around those egg cocoon things. These cultists also have alarms that they can set off, alerting everyone, including vampires in the area, to your presence, similar to other Arkane games. And then there are the Bellwether soldiers. I'm unsure what their deal is, but we know that Jacob used to be one of them. When I experienced them, they were holding down a safe house I needed to clear out, and in a shed nearby it looked like they had interrogated someone to death. They seem to be the take-two things far and seriously mercenary squad. Everyone's a hostile type of deal. Then there are your special ability vampires. So there's the Watchers, who act as spotlights in highly secured areas. They can take you quite quickly if you're not careful and get caught in their beams. Then there are vampires with a shield, which basically has this rotating body shield with small gaps that you can shoot and stake through. Then there are the Siphons, who suck away your life force like Dementors and can be quite the pain. There are the Anglers, that'll kind of shoot something out, grab you and pull you in for a bite. There's the Shroud that disorients you and covers your area in like a dark mist so that for a moment there you can't see anything and you think the game's broken, but it really isn't. And then there are your boss kind of vampires, the vampire gods, the underboss vampires, and the Rook, who is their retaliation vampire when you're getting too disruptive or close. The Rook was the closest I got to the vampire gods, but boy is he something. Absolutely terrifying, but actually was quite accidentally missable. For example, I finished a major objective that triggered the Rook. But if it wasn't for a misclick at the end of the mission that would have allowed me to fast travel back to the fire station, I never would have known that he was there. But I actually couldn't fast travel after the fact when I realized it's very Skyrim enemies are nearby type deal. I was definitely not ready for the Rook and he killed me very quickly. So how long does it take to kill a regular vampire enemy? Definitely don't just run at it with a stake and try to melee it. It won't work, trust me, I know. Basically, you'll have to wear them down, and there are multiple ways to do that. You can run and gun them, which depending on the weapon of choice doesn't take too long, or you can petrify them with a UV ray gun, or use the vendor's ultimate. Once petrified, they'll be still and weak enough to expose their heart to stake. Similar to shooting them, once their health bar has been taken right down, they kind of slump over and you can just stake them where they stand. The stake launcher is amazing though and can straight up stake an enemy and eliminate them instantly. However, another person I was playing with was on the 2nd highest difficulty and they said that they were never successful with their stakes. Whereas I was on a normal level of difficulty and I don't think I missed a stake launcher. Although who knows, that might just be skill. It didn't take too long to take down each individual vampire. In fact, you can kind of just use the UV ray gun to kind of spray and pray them all if you find yourself in a vamp group setting. And then you can just stake them all one by one. But ammo runs out quickly, so I tried not to rely on it. It's kind of like the glue gun in Prey. This question asks if I felt like there were reasons to engage in stealth rather than going straight into all-out combat. 100%. I don't know if it's the type of player I am, but I found myself sneaking constantly. I was always on edge, a little scared, and I scouted from the rooftops quite often for vampires. I think it's rewarding to find ways to take out enemies one by one, as you can get a little bit overwhelmed with multiple vampires on you at once. Particularly if you do run out of ammo for a UV gun. It's quite satisfying to use that stake launcher as well, and sniping feels really satisfying. Extending my answer with another question from Lordy D, you can absolutely backstab humans, and it's also a fun way to eliminate enemies stealthily. You can even sprint, slide, and attack them that way. Now a question from Save the Blues on difficulty, which is definitely something I need to speak about in my review when I have a lot more time with the game on the different difficulty settings. Basically, you have 4 difficulty levels: Daylight, Dusk, Midnight, and Eclipse. We were advised to play on Dusk at the event, so that's what I played, but others I know tried the Midnight. Eclipse was actually locked and couldn't be played. I can't remember if it was locked by levels or if I was told that it needed to unlock after you've completed the game on Midnight first. So in Redfall, we've stepped away from the adaptive difficulty, which makes sense for a co-op game. The adaptive difficulty I personally enjoyed in Deathloop, but I also see the practical use of being able to actually toggle how you want the game to feel. In Deathloop, I got to know the game like the back of my hand, and the AI knew it. It was definitely super hard at one stage to actually kick back a little because of it. And playing on the highest difficulty in Dishonored was definitely a massive challenge sometimes, particularly with the enemy's range of sight. I remember starting the Knife of Dunwall, which I've got the playthrough up on my old uploads if you want to watch it, and I played on the hardest difficulty. I just remember the enemies spotting me from insane distances sometimes, and there were cases even on the Dusk difficulty that I was spotted from precarious distances, but I feel as if I actually can't judge the difficulty very well because the AI isn't done, and I kind of felt like at times it was mega dumb. Like sometimes fights just felt really easy, and I don't know how much of that was the unfinished AI, the difficulty selection, or just potentially how the game was. I also know that someone who played on Midnight absolutely cheesed through the game on Jacob. So far, he is the most OP hero from what I can tell. They considered the game really easy on what was meant to be the second hardest difficulty. Again, the game isn't actually fully complete yet, and that may explain why in earlier snippets of the game the combat just looked really flat. Hopefully that improves. This question is from the great Greg and asks if there are plenty of weapons in the game and how the loot drop system will be structured. I found that it was particularly easy to find dropped weapons of most kinds. The loot is varied by rarity similar to Deathloop, so that will depend on what kind of enemy you're fighting and where you are, but ammo and weapons are abundant. You can also scrap weapons for support value, which you can use to purchase weapons. I personally was really happy with the variety of loot. I think it's similar to Deathloop. You'll come across a lot of weapons and you can kind of just streamline the way that you want to play based on what you find and pick up. Arkane Studios, both Leon and Austin, have developed some absolutely spectacular games. There's something almost magical about the level of support the core community of players that hold Arkane games close to their hearts have. But with this comes the price of constant comparison. I saw it happen with Dishonored 2, and much more with Deathloop, a game that actually took some chances and did something completely different. I think change is a super scary thing for some people. Nostalgia can be scarily dangerous in these communities because of it. I think Deathloop was a great transitionary step in the world of multiplayer / co-op experiences in Arkane, something that Arkane had tried to do a really long time ago with The Crossing. And Redfall is going to be the first game Arkane fans can unite and share an Arkane experience with cooperatively. It's also a different world, with different lore, different art styles, with only a couple of flashes of nostalgic art scattered around. So it has been absolutely flogged by constant comparison, doubt, and criticism from day one. I know that at the core of many of these questions, this is really what's going on in everyone's minds. How does Redfall hold up against Deathloop and Dishonored, and does it feel like an Arkane game? You know what I think? I think it definitely does. There's just this level of familiarity that I have when I explore this world. It doesn't feel like Dishonored, its closest cousin is definitely Deathloop, but it still feels Arkane. They've admitted that they've had to sacrifice a little bit of these minor detail things. In the Q&A that they hosted on their Discord, Richard Stanford even talks about how they developed systems that they could take their design and apply it at scale. But also being someone who has been in Redfall and played the game, I can tell you a lot of my time was eaten up because I was so entrenched in finding those little notes with backstory, reading whiteboards, listening to conversations, looking at book covers. It all still feels handcrafted. Not entirely predictable. Despite its larger scale, it's totally Arkane, and the single player experience is not sacrificed. Having said that, a lot of us are definitely upset over the news that single player will be an online experience only. I'm actually quite interested to see how this will affect me personally, as my internet can also be a little shoddy at times too, so I'm definitely going to be investigating it and reporting back when I get my hands on Redfall again in my review. So that's going to be it for today. Hopefully my insight has helped a little bit, and next I'll be working on a video that will probably answer almost every single question anyone has asked about Redfall and more. Stay tuned because there is definitely more to come. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!